I did want to tell you that I felt that this was a very important dialogue that you shared with us today. I think many of us don't recognize as providers that we ourselves need to take care of ourselves. So thank you for, the apps, the different, videos and relaxation techniques. And I just want to stress to all of you, especially those that that are on the front lines, that you really do want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. It has been a rough 2 years, and who knows what's on the horizon. So, Dr. Smith, I'm going to turn this over to you and your colleague, and we're going to have some dialogue.
Yeah. We've had two lines of questions. One relates to vaso-occlusive crisis-related coping techniques, whether you would offer anything in particular to the patient who's in the hospital. There's a famous quote from one of our sickle cell providers who I think he may have quoted a patient. He says, first, I'm in pain, and then you tell me I'm not in pain, which causes me even more pain. Can you speak to that patient? And I think you're muted, so can you unmute? Yep,
No,
there you go.
I'm not muted.
Okay, you're good.
We can hear you now.
Okay. So there's lots that I can say about this. Every app that I just recommended, those are things that I recommend to my patients. For vaso-occlusive pain crises, muscle relaxation is a really important technique, and breathing exercises. Those are the two that are probably the primary things that I make sure that patients know about. Even Dr. Feinstein's relaxation and breathing video is a great technique for individuals with sickle cell to learn. The Calm app, Headspace, all of those different apps. The Headspace videos on Netflix, great videos also. The Better Sleep app, there are several pain management-based relaxation exercises. So the person is guided and talked through what those exercises are. If you have a psychologist, you want to utilize psychological services. All of us are trained in stress management. Basic stress management skills are going to be important. And a stress management routine is going to be important for someone who has sickle cell. When patients have vaso-occlusive pain crises, a lot of things that I would make sure that I'm teaching them about is also the power of what their thinking is.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the healthcare community, depending on what emergency room they're in or what provider they see, there are people that are just not educated very well about pain and what pain means. And if a person says they're in pain, we have to take them at that face value, and we have to support them with those pain management strategies. Hydration, I've always found as being a big culprit. And when we're in the hospital, it used to dumbfound me where I'd walk into a patient's room and they would have a can of soda on their tray. And really promoting for patients that they have to make those better choices when they're in the hospital about their health, that they're not, not making the problem worse by dehydrating themselves further. So looking at the skills and strategies that a patient can utilize, relaxation apps, I can say that there's a lot as a physician, a nurse practitioner, any type of provider that walks into the room, physician assistant, that you could be helping your patient tremendously by saying, listen, we're going to address this, but there are things that the individual could be doing to help move this in the right direction. And playing one of the apps, just showing them, hey, listen, this is something I learned about. Stress management is important because when we're stressed, vasoconstriction is occurring.
Yeah.
So those are some of the easy recommendations that I have for even what we learned about today.
Yeah. Do you have specific recommendations for countering the message that they might get from an unsympathetic provider
Yeah.
You want to get mad and punch them out, right? But
I know.
you can't do that because
We
that's
wanna
going to make
pull a
you
Will-
hurt
We want
more.
to pull a Will Smith.
Yeah.
Right? So here's what I would suggest to that. One, it's infuriating. And what I usually educate my patients about is that whether pain is psychological or physical, our body doesn't really notice the difference. We need to address that. If someone is saying something that is really against what a patient even knows from their own education about sickle cell disease and what pain they're in, and something that was really tough to witness sometimes when I was still working in the hospital primarily with sickle cell, was when someone would say, oh, well, their pain crisis should be over by now.
That's a good one. Why aren't you home yet?
You know,
Or why are you here for the third time this
like,
month
we
in the
need to move
emergency
this along.
department?
It's been so many days. We need to
Yeah.
kind of just move you out
We
of
need to
here.
get that
And
bed
that's how
empty.
patients take it.
So Dr.
And
Griffin, is there like any...
Some of this is having the broader conversations with our colleagues.
Yes.
Gentle conversations about
Yeah.
providing education, and making sure that we're shoring up our patients with their own education
Yeah.
about they're going to face this.
Yeah.
Pain is this experience where you say what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there are some people that do abuse the system.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that percentage is a lot lower than what people, what was real.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping patients to create a certain language around what their needs are, also how to communicate effectively without allowing themselves to be so rattled, and learning some good self-regulation strategies. And meditation and mindfulness
Okay.
are some excellent resources for helping with that.
Yeah. That's good.
Dr. Griffin, is there a pediatric rehabilitation program on the East Coast that deals with chronic pain for sickle cell patients that you're aware of?
Yes. So Kennedy Krieger, which is a Johns Hopkins, they have an inpatient program that's quite a good program. Boston Children's has an exceptional program. We take patients from all over the country and all over the world. We've had kids come as far as Australia to our program. Ours is an outpatient pain rehab program, so they're not in the hospital. They stay at Ronald McDonald House. And they can be in our program anywhere from a month to 3 months. We're really helping them to rehabilitate to become more functional in life. And our program's pretty similar across the country, but there are several programs on the East Coast, but unfortunately not a lot lower. They're upper. Boston, Cincinnati. Those are the two on the East Coast that I would really highly recommend.
We're going to come back to patients in a minute, but I do want to give the providers a little help. You've been around sickle cell providers long enough to know that we have a particular kind of stigma. You know where I'm headed. I'm going to use a nasty word. If you're a white sickle cell provider and you're in the wrong part of town, they're going to call you a nigger lover. If you're a black sickle cell provider and you stand up for other blacks to get appropriate care, people are going to play the race card on you just because you're asking for appropriate, equitable care. So there's this sickle cell provider stigma problem. And I recognize that we can individually, talk to ourselves about this, but you've been with us in groups where you sort of talked about these kinds of issues. Can you address that for some of the providers that are listening?
It's funny. I've actually been part of some articles about stigma and having sickle cell disease, and I think that that has permeated even into providers. And I mean, there are things that providers have been told that even coming into the field have said, like, oh yeah, you can do well if you go into sickle cell because nobody cares about that area. I mean, just like some awful things providers have been told about choosing to work with individuals with sickle cell disease. That stigmatization is something that can be very difficult. Can you imagine how you're dealing with it and how your patients, what they're having to face?
Mm-hmm.
I think that things like grant rounds are important. I think that individuals who are providers of sickle cell care should be providing more education. I think that now is a better time than any other. With what happened during the pandemic, one of these pandemics we talked about is not just COVID, but really the pandemic of racism. And it's a time people are sort of like their ears are a little more tuned to this. But unfortunately, it's swinging both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's swinging in the direction of, oh my, should pay attention to these disparities in healthcare. And it's swinging the other way, which is like just hear about critical race theory about like, you know what, we're not just going to extinguish this conversation completely. And we all as providers need to make sure that we're not part of just the complacency of being extinguished. Mm-hmm. We need to speak up. We need to provide education. We need to call our colleagues out when they're behaving badly. Mm-hmm. We need to educate someone, sit down and have these meetings to really talk through when any one of us or our colleagues are contributing to health disparities mm-hmm. or health discrimination. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that includes for us. Mm-hmm. I know that it's hard to ask providers that are really in this difficult position to begin with of stigma in working with sickle cell to be the champions of sickle cell. But I think it's the only way. Mm-hmm. Whether that is something more formal like grand rounds and then having a true discussion around stigma and working with patients who have sickle cell disease, or partnering with some of your other colleagues, like partnering with pain medicine. Mm-hmm. And maybe even palliative care, mm-hmm. and talking more about sickle cell care, partnering with chaplaincy, and talking about what its impact is. Mm-hmm. Another thing that many medical centers and medical schools are putting in place is diversity, equity, inclusion programs, mm-hmm. or having a program officer attached to whether it's a hospital or a medical school, partnering with that individual to talk about there's a particular stigma we're dealing with mm-hmm. for the providers and the patients in the world of sickle cell. And I think that this is a better time than any other to really start to tap into those kinds of resources.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. There are 2 or 3 other questions that have come up on the screen, and I think what we could do to answer them is to forward them and have you respond to the answers. One of them has to do with medical cannabis. Another one had to do with PTSD.
We could go over those in the morning.
And we could talk about that. So we'll send those to you. And
please
have you,
do, because because I'm in California.
Yeah.
I think we're probably kind of at the forefront of use, especially for pain management. We have a lot we've been doing with the medical use of cannabis.
Yeah.
Also, the use of ketamine is something that we use a lot in our setting. Okay. Not just ketamine, but ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Yeah. And PTSD. I could talk a whole presentation on that with sickle cell. I put my email address in the chat.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions they'd like to send me directly,
we'll make sure we forward those to you, and then we'll go over them. You can answer them offline, but we'll go over them tomorrow, first thing in the morning when we talk. This has been great.
Thank you.
I forgot to call out positively Californians who are who are getting up at some of them at 5 a.m. to join us for Sccape. You are to be commended. For those of you who sleep in until 8 and then catch the reruns, that's okay too. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all stay safe that are affected by these tornadoes.
Yeah, I think we're not having to shelter anymore right now.
Exciting, so we'll see. Thank you, Dr. Griffin.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to continue, and we are going to wrap up early today. If you could just give me 1 second, I'm going to step off camera to remove this existing mic that I have so I can use this one, and I'll be right back.